fascist, chauvinistic government fool.
I love that line. Way to go, John Lydon. He was terrific on so many songs, and he's still putting out great stuff. And I want to let you know that part of what we're going to be covering tonight is, yes, you got it, about the economic straits, of course. We've got new numbers about the inflation numbers that we mentioned last night coming in much higher than expected. Plus, I want to give you some information about big tech layoffs. That is a very, very big deal. That's inside the news notes if you're one of the genetically superior paid subscribers at the Gardner Goldsmith Substack. But I also want to mention right now, hopefully you're not just out of college, but this is a T-shirt I designed a long time ago. And I've had some questions about it once in a while when I've had that shirt on. They're like, what's that property of shirt? And I was like, that's a shirt that I designed for kids who were just out of college. And I used to sell them on college campuses once in a while. Not a lot of them. They weren't super popular, but I thought, well, okay. Yeah. And I got to say, you know, the United States government getting involved with handing out college loans is utterly ridiculous. And it just inspired so many people to either go to college when they could have gone into some other field and not wasted the money for college, or to go to colleges that they normally would not have been able to afford, and then they got into dire straits. Really, really tough stuff. We're going to do a special show about that sometime, and I am going to invite my friend Jason, not Jason Sorens, but Jason Osborne on the program, because for a long time, he and his dad ran a collections agency that handled a massive amount of the college loans that had gone into, you might say, the red for many of those students and needed to be collected. So economic straits all around. We'll talk more about that in various segments throughout the weeks as the summer rolls along. Sorry to be a bummer on some of your summer, as the rhyme might go, but we've got to cover it. I got to make sure I continue talking about economics, some of the unfortunately dark blossoms from this political economic cesspool that we've got, and then try to derive some very important lessons out of those things. So we'll slice those off. We'll make some good classrooms out of those things with the history of United States college loans and stuff like that. But yes, that is the T-shirt that I have designed. I should make a warfare T-shirt as well, trapped by the warfare state. Let's get into what has been happening and the latest. If we go over to the news notes right now, war. As we broadcast last night and expressed skepticism over the Apache shot down by Iran narrative, figuring it was a pretext for Trump to attack Iran and for Netanyahu to expand his aggression in Lebanon, Gaza, and the West Bank, the reality unfolded, or perhaps the unreality folded live, and proved those suspicions well-founded. RT reported early on that, quote, U.S. strikes Iran in response to helicopter incident. And we talked a little bit about that last night. So there you go. CENTCOM described the attacks as a proportional response to the alleged downing of an AH-64 Apache. Let me ask you, do you think engaging in another war crime is a proportional response even to this story, which they have not proved? And of course, how is it defensive or proportional when you're not supposed to be there in the first place? As I said, it's sort of like a home invader saying that he has a right to fight back when you're trying to defend your home. Well, I thought Natalie Morris did it again. Great stuff from her. We're going to get to that in just a minute. I don't want to skip over anti-war. Anti-war's coverage here. U.S. begins bombing Iran after U.S. Apache helicopter shot down in Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM said that its forces rescued 2 crew members from the downed helicopter. Now, I'm not sure about this, everybody, but I think those 2 helicopter pilots also traveled about 100 miles inside Iran with broken bones and then hid in the mountains, and then they were able to be located while and then they got rescued. Or is that another story that maybe is also false? I don't know. Maybe it was like, I know. Both of those guys, they look a lot like Woody Harrelson, and their last names were Shoe, just like the movie Wag the Dog. Do it for old Shoe. It's not fake in any way. It's not totally made up for your consumption. And even if it were real, obviously, we know that the United States definitely belongs there, right? Absolutely. U.S. Central Command announced on Tuesday that its forces began bombing Iran. Well, of course, it's just natural. I mean, the sun went down, you got to bomb. And the attacks, it said, were a response to Iran allegedly shooting down a U.S. Army Apache helicopter that was not doing the Apache dance properly. And it was patrolling the Strait of Hormuz as part of the U.S. enforcement of a blockade of Iranian ports, which, of course, is completely illegitimate based on international law, the U.S. Constitution, and basic morality. Despite the attacks being part of the same war of aggression the U.S. and Israel launched against Iran in February, CENTCOM is framing them as self-defense. Well done, Dave DeCamp. Thank you for doing such a good job as a journalist. He wrote their quote, CENTCOM forces began launching self-defense strikes against Iran at 5 p.m. Eastern Time today at the Commander-in-Chief's direction in response to yesterday's downing of a U.S. Army Apache helicopter, the command said. Isn't that just wonderful? Yeah, that's right. There's nothing like real gaslighting actually bringing people's deaths or causing even further problems with your tax money being involved with now another war crime. What's the war crime? We'll get to it in just a minute. Here is Natalie Morris as she nailed it again. And of course, you can watch Redacted Monday through Thursday on YouTube now, on their Rumble channel, and on their X account. Here is what Natalie said. The U.S. began striking Iran overnight in retaliation for what President Trump said was a downed helicopter that was patrolling the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM says that it is done now, as if it were a movie premiere that came and went. Now, let me ask you something. Is anything I'm saying right now offensive or wrong or incorrect? Then why would somebody give the show a thumbs down before it even starts? I don't even understand how that's. And I mentioned MOE in the chat before we started. Rumble should definitely have an algorithm. Before a show starts, people should not be able to give it thumbs up or thumbs down one way or the other, I think. I think that would probably be a good thing to do. But anyway, in response, says Natalie, Iran reportedly launched attacks on the U.S. Fifth Fleet base in Bahrain, U.S. assets in Jordan, Kuwait, and possibly Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The extent of the damage on either side is yet to be assessed as of this writing. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned that the U.S. should cease escalating with Iran because its military, quote, will leave no attack or threat unanswered. Leave our region if you want to be safe. All of this started over an empty helicopter? The story is fishy, pun intended, I think. President Trump said that there were only 2 pilots on board and both are safe and uninjured. Now he's telling us that the drone got lodged in the helicopter. There was fire, but those courageous helicopter pilots were able to bring the helicopter down into the water. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I think that was after they climbed into the mountains with broken bones and sent a self signal out, and they looked like Woody Harrelson, and they did it for old shoe. It's just nonsense. All of this started over a helicopter, empty helicopter. She says there are many unconfirmed reports that there were 7 people aboard, not 2, and that they did not survive. Why else would the U.S. respond to the destruction of an empty aircraft? Again, like I said, if Donald Trump, we discussed this last night, if Donald Trump really thought that he was on the verge of some sort of great truce, peace breakthrough, then in this case, if both those guys survived and it was a drone strike, why wouldn't he downplay it and possibly not even mention it? Why would he use it as a pretext to then go in and respond and then commit another war crime? As I noted here, we've got more. Thus, the U.S. pretext became revealed as the night darkened, and Iran's government released this. So going off the tail end of what Natalie had to write, here is drop site. Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued the following statement on the U.S. attacks. Quote, in the early hours of Wednesday, June 10th, 1405, under the pretext of the downing of one of its Army's Apache helicopters over the Strait of Hormuz, the American terrorist regime, perfectly stated, carried out savage attacks Monday night against several areas in the south of the country. These attacks were a flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter, particularly Article 2, Paragraph 4, and the fundamental principle prohibiting the use of force in international relations. Is any of that incorrect? No, it's all precisely right. And this, I'm an anarchist, but They're right. What they're saying is 100% validated. With these aggressive actions, the ruling American establishment has once again demonstrated its criminal and warmongering nature. Continuing, the Iranians said, in response to the U.S. military aggression against Iran and the blatant violation of our country's national sovereignty and territorial integrity, the powerful armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran, exercising their legitimate right to self-defense, struck hard the American bases and assets in the region that were the source of these aggressions. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, while strongly condemning the American crime of military aggression against Iran, once again reminds all countries of the region, particularly those located in the southern shores of the Persian Gulf, of their legal and ethical responsibility to prevent the U.S. terrorist army and the Zionist regime from using their territory and facilities to plan, organize, execute, and support aggressive actions against Iran. It warns that the Islamic Republic of Iran will not hesitate to exercise its inherent right to self-defense, including by targeting the source of attacks, as well as those bases and logistical facilities used to carry out and support aggressive operations against Iran. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran also once again reminds the United Nations of its responsibility, particularly the Security Council and the Secretary General, to safeguard international peace and security and to hold the aggressor parties accountable. Drop site, thank you. Now, I just want to mention, for those people who might be MAGA adjacent or occasionally dip their toe back into the fetid pool of MAGA cess, well, let me just mention that if they're going to claim that the Iranians enacted these attacks, and this was a response to those attacks that Iran launched against Israel, I hope that they will remember that they can go back in time a little bit further, because Iran was responding to Israel attacking Lebanon. And Iran has been supporting Hezbollah as a response to the Israeli occupation. Not because they want to send out weapons all over the place and cause disruption. They are aligning themselves on a state-to-state level, basically and most fundamentally on the defensive side. Okay, so if people are talking about so-called just war theory and they're stuck within the statist mindset, there's no excuse to be supporting Israel or supporting the United States. There is every reason to recognize that Iran and Hezbollah and the Palestinians inside Gaza and the people in the West Bank and those people fighting al-Jawlani or the Israelis in Syria are all working as a response to aggression that goes back decades, over a century in some cases, for the people in Palestine, okay? So there's no argument that can be made to say that the Americans and the Israelis are justified and that somehow these groups of Shiites or Sunnis who might be working with them in these various countries that are trying to push back against the aggression, there's no way that you can say the aggressors of Israel, the Zionist experiment, and the United States are somehow working on the defensive. And if you pick out one little bubble from that giant sudsy froth of death and you say this was the cause of it, you're missing a lot of history. Just like people who don't want to deal with the USS Liberty. And we got a great segment coming up on that. So that very important stuff, we're going to go back to the news notes because I want to show you this. Then the U.S. attacked water resources. And now we get to the war crime. That's right. 20,000 people now have to scramble to get water from some alternate source if possible. A lot of people talked about this. Well, I think one of the best, and you'll see Saeed Mohammed Morandi was on today on numerous shows, and Professor Morandi was great talking about this attack. Aaron Mate was on with the judge. Here's Drop Site. Attack on water reservoirs leave 20,000 without drinking water. Did Donald Trump mention this? Did he mention how proud he is of keeping people without water when they're in the desert? A reported U.S. attack on 2 water reservoirs in southern Iran has left 20,000 people without access to drinking water, according to their Mizan news agency. In a statement, the local Iranian water utility company said the reservoirs were, quote, targeted and completely destroyed on Wednesday morning in U.S. attacks in the Bamani area of Sirik in southern Iran. Now, that is not as arid as some of the areas in the north, but still, This is not good. Why would the United States engage in that sort of activity? And of course, the Israelis are doing flyovers as well over Tehran. And there's video footage of the Israeli jets flying over. Many of those are Israeli jets either provided by the United States or by Great Britain. Now, here's Mario Nawfal doing a great job right here. Breaking Iran's water reservoir claim just got more substantial. The CEO of the regional water company says U.S. strikes hit his facilities, knocking out drinking water across an entire district. Again, this is civilian infrastructure. That's a war crime. Pierre Mayer, Hormozgan Water and Wastewater Chief Abdul Hamid Hamzapur identified the two destroyed reservoirs as 500 and 2,000 cubic meter tanks supplying the Bamani district and the city of Kunstak with distribution now halted for every village in the area. If accurate, thousands of civilians lost their water in a strike aimed at military coastline, and Tehran now holds exactly the story it wants the world reading as it weighs its response. Yep. And Mario's bringing up possibly a tactical error on the part of Donald Trump and those folks when it comes to propaganda. I want to give you this. Saudi allowed the United States, to use Saudi airspace. U.S. aerial refueling tankers, KC-46A Pegasus in particular, they've been active over or near Saudi airspace and the Gulf of Oman in the same time frame as this was going on, providing logistical support. Some posts on X reference tankers operating in coordination with Saudi aircraft and transiting the area. There you go, right there. So the Saudis open themselves up again. So there's Kuwait, there's Saudi. It's just amazing. What do they think they're getting out of this? They're digging the holes even further. We'll continue real quick, though. The U.S. attacked Bandar Abbas, Keshem Island, Sirik Jask, and Minab. These were carried out by U.S. Air Force and Navy fighter jets, with CENTCOM describing them as so-called self-defense responses. Just a huge, huge error. Massive. Now, for a good recap of this, I want to turn to the good folks at RT. RT. Great coverage from RT. And RT actually, I'll bring this up here. RT actually provides us with a perfect opening on the show. Here we go with Russia Today and their quick recap of this.
Delhi, as 3 Indian sailors remain missing following a U.S. missile strike on a commercial vessel in the Gulf of Oman.
That's right. Another United States strike on a private vessel, this an Indian vessel. Was that part of the plan, Donald? Is that going to really help traffic?
Donald Trump vows to strike Iran again, saying the U.S. will be, quote, attacking them very hard. That's hours after he said Tehran is taking too long to negotiate and would now pay the price.
So that's it. Where we stand right now is Donald Trump is continuing to issue threats. While all of these parasites, from the Interior Secretary to the Transportation Energy Secretary, they're all there on your dime. Let's go into this a little further.
And public fury engulfs the UK over the attempted beheading of a local man by an asylum seeker in Belfast, all while Prime Minister Keir Starmer appears too busy looking for more money to give to Ukraine.
And we will get to that. Keir Starmer had no comment about this attack in Belfast, Northern Ireland, that literally saw video footage of a man stabbing a guy's eye out and trying to behead him, while Keir Starmer welcomed the guy with government money and is welcoming, you got it, Zelensky to offer him more government money. But here's the opening of RT.
warm welcome to you. It's just turned 11 p.m. here in Moscow, and this is RT International with the latest global news update. It's good to have you with us. A diplomatic scandal has erupted between Washington and New Delhi over the U.S. attack on a Palau-flagged tanker with an Indian crew. U.S. Central Command has confirmed the strike, claiming the ship was violating the American blockade on Iran. 21 sailors were rescued, but 3 remain missing. India has summoned the U.S. ambassador to protest the attack on the ship. RT correspondent Rajuta Theet has more details for us.
The U.S. Central Command has claimed responsibility for this attack on a commercial vessel in the coast of Oman, which had around 24 Indian nationals on board, out of which 21 of them have been rescued. However, 3 of them are still missing. And as of the latest updates, India's Ministry of External Affairs has also summoned the Charge d'Affaires of the United States.
Now, if this were, say, Thomas Jefferson's era, that would be called piracy at sea. But for MAGA, they seem to think that this is somehow acceptable. Just unbelievable. Just incredible. And the United States is telling us that they're negotiating with Iran when clearly they're not negotiating with Iran. And then they use this dumb helicopter story so that they can continue to engage in kinetic activity and give Benjamin Netanyahu cover to attack Lebanon. So we'll just finish this off because Trump is threatening them even more.
What they expected in the negotiations and the excessive demand that they made wasn't accepted by the Iranian side. And they have no other choice but to carry out some attacks against Iran in order to put pressure on Iran. And if it doesn't work, which it won't, they would adhere to some further attacks, and then they would claim some victory just out of thin air, and then I would expect that they would lead the situation and they would claim some Trump victory.
So why is Trump doing this? As this guy says, they're going to attack again, and then what? And then where are they going to go? What are they going to do? What purpose does this serve? It keeps Netanyahu busy, but it is utterly destructive to the world economy. Let's talk about economic straits right now, because Donald Trump is all over the map. If you go to the news notes, we're going to go into Donald Trump's crazy claims. And first, I want to mention this, a reminder from yesterday. As I noted, the Iranians are not sending as much through the strait as they were in the first quarter. So we covered that last night. It's dropped precipitously. And here's a little bit more on the overall picture. Tanker passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Kepler data from the cradle shows limited vessel crossings between the 5th and 7th of June. And you'll actually see this. It shows traffic through the strait remained constrained between the 5th and 7th of June, with just 8 monitored commercial and non-commercial crossings. All transits used the Iranian route, while only 2 sanctioned Iranian-flagged vessels passed through, indicating limited broader commercial activity. And yet, keep this in mind when you hear the claim of Donald Trump in about 25 seconds, because Trump claims that the U.S. has secretly been escorting vessels through the strait. Are they turning off all transmissions and transponders? How are they getting through without actually being seen by satellite? Kepler notes that a recent attack on MSC container ship has further highlighted the fragile operating environment, with the strait expected to remain open only under narrowly managed conditions amid a more volatile diplomatic backdrop. So again, only 8 between the 5th and the 7th. Now that's between. I don't know whether they might have meant inclusive, but that still is a dramatically low number. And then, of course, we've got this. There's this stunner from Donald Trump. Does anyone believe this? And how? If he speaks the truth, is this ethical or constitutional? So remember, they just hit The United States just hit that Iranian ship, that Indian ship. And yet Trump says this. Drop site reports, President Trump claimed the U.S. has carried out a month-long secret operation to escort commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, saying the effort has helped move more than 100 million barrels of oil and allowed over 200 merchant ships to transit the waterway. Now, let me ask you this. If they have been asking for help, and they meant it, to open the Strait of Hormuz, if they have been desperate for the Iranians to stop, as the United States says, blocking the Strait of Hormuz, which is, that was the pretext under which the United States started its block down in the southeast at the opening of the Persian Gulf. If all of that stuff was valid, then how were they escorting all these ships? And if they were escorting all these ships, then what are their claims actually about Iran blocking the strait? Which then goes towards their argument for setting up their secondary block down in the southeast at the entrance of the Persian Gulf. If they can get all these guys through, then why are they saying that Iran has everything blocked and the United States has got to respond with kinetic activity and another block? That makes no sense. Here's more. Dropsite says, in a social media post, Trump asserted that the operation proves the United States of America controls the Strait of Hormuz and not Iran. I think you mean the United States, not Iran, controls the Strait of Hormuz, not the United States controls the Strait of Hormuz and not Iran. You got a little problem with your syntax there, Donald. Adding that Iran's military has been defeated and its economy is lost. His claims could not be independently verified, though both the New York Times and Financial Times have previously reported on the renewed U.S. efforts. 100 million barrels and 200 ships equals about 5 days of pre-war oil transit through the strait. So there's a statement attracting people again to go to his Truth Social to prop up that dying entity. He says, last month I directed our great U.S. military to execute a secret mission to support oil tankers and other commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz. G.I. Joe and his action arm came through, and today I'm pleased to announce that this effort has resulted in more than 100 million barrels of oil making its way through, you mean their way, through the strait and into the open market. More than 200 commercial ships have safely traveled through the strait. This wildly successful effort is because the United States of America controls the Strait of Hormuz, not Iran. Well, we know you don't control Iran. Again, the syntax, Donald. Didn't he go to, I thought he went to a pretty prestigious, okay. Their military is defeated and their economy is lost. It's over for Iran. Thank you for your attention to this matter and for visiting my Truth Social and bringing more traffic there. President Donald J. Trump. Okay. Now, drop sites get this. U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright reiterated to Congress that ship traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is rising very meaningfully, but said he could not quantify what he meant by meaningfully. His remarks come as independent shipping data still points to a heavily, yeah, you got it, that's right, a heavily constrained waterway. Kepler recorded just 8 monitored commercial and non-commercial transits between the 5th and the 7th, as I noted, while Lloyd's of London, Lists Intelligence, and Windward found the average number of daily dark transits had risen from 2 to over 6 over the past week. That increase remains a fraction of the roughly 135 ships per day that transited Hormuz before the war. Now, I'm going to play this, and then I'm going to ask the obvious question, which may be on many of your minds already.
Honest mistake. But the reason I bring that up is because yesterday you just said that in the Strait of Hormuz, traffic was rising very meaningfully. Is that true? And what does meaningfully mean to you?
That is true. We are not talking overly about it, but this is using the U.S. military to increase flows of oil out of the Strait of Hormuz, and things are going well.
I'd like to talk a little bit more detail, though, at least more than the word meaningfully. Like, what would you consider meaningful? Like, are we talking about many ships? Are we talking about one ship? Because the I'm a Port Watch seems to indicate that it hasn't actually increased meaningfully.
That would be incorrect. That data would be incorrect.
Okay, so you have you have data that shows that there's been a significant increase in the number of ships going through the Strait of Hormuz that would supply the rest of the world with oil.
That's correct.
And these are not Iranian ships. These are ships that would supply us and our allies with oil. But you can't go into detail about exactly how many or what meaningfully means. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then
Okay, now, what goes through my mind here is insurance. We mentioned Lloyd's of London there. There are a lot of folds to this origami that need to be explored, and they will be exposed down the line. So, for example, did the United States government contact the major insurance companies to say, oh, no, it's totally fine, we will give them protection? Because they tried to do that before, and that didn't affect the insurance rates. The insurance got to a point where Lloyd's would not insure the ships. And without insurance, the ships won't go through. Now, Iran was providing insurance and was asking for a fee paid by Bitcoin or with yuan as things started to unfold. The United States said that they would try to escort ships, but that was having no effect. No one was accepting their offers. Remember that? Now, it's possible they've put up a great theater, but I doubt it. Now, let's turn to Natalie Morris and Clayton Morris about this, because Donald Trump and the economic straits, this is the point at which Donald Trump today mentioned something about this, but also in this very strange, clipped, I don't even know, illogical, non sequitur way. First said that he loves inflation. Let's get to it. Natalie and Clayton Morris.
Here today, he says he actually likes inflation. So that was a campaign lie. Watch.
Concerned, Mr. President, about the latest inflation number which came out this morning. Could that be a
No, I love it. The numbers were great. You know what I really love? I love the inflation.
Okay, so first of all, he said the numbers were great. No, the numbers weren't great. Over 4%, Donald. Do you have any grasp of what you're talking about? And again, that doesn't even include food and gas. What a jeez.
You know why? Because as soon as this war is over, you know, I can say it now. Something you didn't know. You know, we've been taking out millions of barrels of oil. Nobody knows it. You know who doesn't know about it? Iran, until right now. We took out the other night 22 ships late at night with no lights because they don't have any radar because we blasted the crap out of it. We took out, that's why oil's $85 a barrel. I mean, you take a look.
What does that have to do with the price of milk?
I don't know. Last week, Philip said he bought 3 bags of groceries for $160. Philip, does this make you feel better that we've stolen oil from Iran?
I mean, are you familiar with the logic fallacy of false equivalent? Because I'm pretty sure that's what the hell do those two things have to do with each other? Right. I love inflation because we steal oil. Like I'm happy to pay $160 for 3 bags of groceries because Mercury's in retrograde. Well, what the hell does that have to do with anything? Like,
I really don't know. Also, you know, from the perspective of someone who runs a small business or someone who's driving themselves to work, obviously high prices, high gas prices, cutting into their profits. So if you're someone, like I said, who drives and delivers windows or something like that for a living, you are taking home far less. You are able to buy less. You cannot feed your family quite as comfortably. Everything's a stretch. And he's saying, well, look, before we were doing well, so we had to do this war because I surmised that we could afford it when inflation has never been negative since he's a person obviously does not.
Exactly. And Natalie makes great points. The inflation rate has never been in negative numbers. It's essentially, as we know, year upon year, getting worse and worse and worse for people to be able to try to afford what they can buy. And Drop Sites got some basic numbers about crude. Here we go. So, Donald, maybe you might want to address this. U.S. crude stocks fall sharply as refiners crank up activity. But we've mentioned here, refiners are limited because they don't have any new refiners out there yet. U.S. commercial crude inventories fell by 7.2 million barrels last week, Donald, to 426.5 million barrels, well above the approximately 4 million barrel draw analysts had expected, as refiners boosted activity to fill supply gaps caused by the Iran war, according to the official EIA statistics. As I mentioned, however, and I'm going to go through some more of the information based specifically on this report tomorrow to tell you just how difficult it is for them to expand refining capacity because they don't have new refiners. They've been able to add to old refineries and expand those a little bit over the past 25 years, but they haven't had a new refinery in that long, and they won't have another new one until 2027. By the numbers, week ending June 5th, crude down 7.2 million barrels. Cushing Hub down 801,000 barrels. Gasoline up 0.2 million barrels. Distillates down 0.2 million barrels. Refinery utilization 95.3%, up 0.6 points. So again, they're almost at 100% capacity for refining. And after that, they're screwed. I try to, again, and the only reason I know about this stuff is because I was reporting on that during the Biden administration. I did a bunch of reports on it for MRC TV, so I knew where to go. I was like, no, this, and what really cued it was when Trump tried to claim credit for opening up or starting a new refinery a couple months ago. And I knew that refinery was announced during the Biden administration in 2024 and that it wasn't going to be done until 2027. And they hadn't had any new refineries for 2 decades. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable. And this idea that Trump claimed the U.S. has secretly been moving millions of barrels of oil through dark transits through the Straits of Hormuz, the average number of daily dark transits, they say here, has risen from 2 to 6 over the past week, according to Lloyd's List Intelligence Windward. That's 2 to 6 over a week, Donald. That's from Lloyd's, the insurance company. The Financial Times reported the increase has been aided in part by U.S. military aerial assistance and coordination with commercial shipping. Even so, the increase does little to offset the collapse in traffic from roughly 135 daily ship transits before the war. This didn't have to happen. It is illegal. And it's destroying the U.S. economy. And of all things, it is providing, of course, cover for leftists. Let me give you this. As many free market economists expected, the CPI is skyrocketing. AIER's Peter Earle just appeared on CNBC to discuss, you got it, the Consumer Price Index. So let's go over to the CPI data and the latest on that. This is coming to us from CNBC, and here we go. Now, they might have a commercial popping in here, but Pete Earle, we were just talking about AIER and Ed Stringham, who used to head up AIER before Pete came in. And so here is CNBC talking about the new numbers.
Department official Kitty Richards, senior fellow at Groundwork Collaborative, and Peter Earle, senior director of research at the American Institute for Economic Research. Kitty, I guess, from where you sit, it's tough for a lot of people in the country to deal with affordability, and didn't get any better with these numbers, although maybe they could have been worse.
Yeah.
Let's just pause it there for a minute. That's right. We're talking 4.2 or 4.3%.
I think that's right. And, earlier we were talking about not just the inflation number, but we also got real wages, and real wages are negative the last couple of months. And that's a real squeeze on families. And I know that when we're thinking about Fed policy, we talk a lot about core inflation, but Americans are paying that headline inflation number. They're paying it at the pump when they fill up their car to get to work. They're paying it in airfare for their summer travel. They're paying it in food prices, which are also stripped out of core. And so I think we're seeing American families really squeezed by this inflation. Their wages aren't keeping pace. The cost of everything is going up, and that's on top of several years of inflation. And so this is a really big problem for Americans' pocketbooks.
And Peter, the software and chips notwithstanding, the market just, sort of is not paying attention to any of this, which just makes the whole inequality discussion maybe, more important, and the K-shaped economy and everything else. Things are clicking along in the stock market, but that there are.
We'll pause it on there. And I do want to go through this commercial real quick, everybody. And I want to mention also, a lot of this, I think, down the line is going to show us that a lot of the people who are doing very well, and this difference between the haves and the have-nots, will be revealed 5-10 years down the line as economic historians go into this, will be revealed as connections to the Federal Reserve and the political fascist system that they've got. And as I mentioned, the CARES Act allowing businesses to have their bonds purchased by the Federal Reserve.
That are having trouble paycheck to paycheck.
Sure. I mean, we've seen it for years now. We now have what's essentially a relative price problem with oil that's landing on top of a service-based economy where prices are stickier and things are staying higher longer. I think what's important right now is that the Fed's job is not to hammer the economy every time one particular category of good or service gets more expensive. The job now is to prevent that from spreading into expectations, into wages and general inflation. So, I think what Steve and Rick were saying before is right. I think what we need right now is patient restraint, not to ease prematurely, certainly, but don't over-tighten in response to this. I think they have to wait for more data. And of course, one of the problems with inflation is that there's a higher, noise to signal ratio in the price level.
So this is going to cause more problems, and something that many people who teach economics will explain. And you might have already spoken to your kids about this. The cyclical nature of this, the feedback loop that comes about, especially as things start to kick into hyperinflation mode, is that the expectations of the people who see the higher prices lead to decreased purchases, which then lead to even more expectations of harder times, which lead to even more decreased purchases, while the central government is pushing for lower interest rates. So prices continue to rise, even though people are holding back their purchases. And that just leads to a massive problem, as then eventually people start to recognize they've got to spend their money as quickly as possible because it's going to be worthless. It will be worth even less in an hour. But the crash of the economy and people pulling back their spending really starts to take effect, oftentimes psychologically. And the Fed tries to manage that, and politicians try to manage that. All of this comes from central planning. How can you be a free person if the money you use in an exchange is controlled by an entity that claims the legal monopoly on the use of force, the government? Why can't you decide, I want to trade this for this and see if somebody values this thing? Why can't banks have their own stores of gold to say, we will issue and we will say, this is a redemption slip. We promise to have X amount of ounces of gold in our bank, and we will not deplete that. We're not going to go fractional reserve. And some banks might say we're going to go fractional reserve, but in lending out, what we're going to do is we're going to claim these things as assets. And then you could say, I don't want to be dealing with that because I think your claim of an asset is not an asset. Right now, the Federal Reserve issues loans to banks. Banks issue loans to people. The Federal Reserve doesn't have the gold on hand. They just print it up. They make whatever they want. Then they hand it to the banks. The banks loan the money out to people. They claim that those loans are assets when many times they're not assets. And then the federal government insures them through the FDIC, inspiring the moral hazard to get even worse. That never would happen in a private marketplace. If it did, there would be a mistake. People would recognize it, and people wouldn't go in that direction. They'd go a different path. That's why the market's so important. As I mentioned, there's no such thing as market failure. You can have failure inside with individuals or businesses making bad decisions. And that's an important part of the market process. We have to be able to see where other people have made mistakes, where their decisions were wrong, areas of the economy that aren't as popular as people might think. We can't have them propped up through secret buys of the bonds of these corporations by the Federal Reserve or by stock markets that market purchases that are being pumped up in ratios of price value ratios that are beyond belief. That's insanity. It's absolutely crazy. And that is what this whole thing is based on. It's all based on debt, expectations of acquisitions, and of course, loose monetary policy, allowing the people who get the money first to acquire these things. Then when the liquidation comes, they'll get your stuff at rock bottom prices after it's already been improved. This is, as Time Zone says, the rich get richer, the poor are getting poorer. Fascist, chauvinistic government fools, right? Well, Pete Earle's on it, and that is how difficult it is to try to manage a system. It's impossible. As the Wizard of Oz says, I don't know how it works. Now, the tech sector, let me give you this on the economy, everybody. It's not good. The U.S. tech sector announces most job cuts in nearly 2 years. I'm going to go back to the Pete Earle thing tomorrow, but let me go to this a little bit more because I think this is important. Julia Fanzaras mentions this tech sector announcement is just, this is incredible. Let me give you some of this information, okay? U.S. tech companies in May announced the biggest job cuts in nearly 2 years, going back to August of 2024. Wow. Unbelievable. And they're expecting more. Even more job cuts. We're talking layoffs of nearly 150,000 people as companies pour money into AI. Extreme Tech from Yahoo Finance has this. There's still a month left in the first half of 2026, and the tech industry has already seen nearly 150,000 layoffs. The implementation of generative AI, they say, is cited as the top reason for several of these so-called reductions in force. Now, let me just ask you a quick question. Again, there will be displacement when AI or any tool comes in, right? But this should be seen as a golden opportunity for investment, because the only reason that a tool is used is if it decreases the burden, if it decreases the weight, if it decreases toil. That's why people would be dropped. But that increases opportunities. That increases opportunities for profit, for productivity, and for new people to get new jobs in other areas where the money that is now being saved is going to be spent on those new opportunities. But for some reason, those new opportunities aren't arising. Now, why would that be? Oh, that's right. Because Donald Trump and the U.S. Congress are not allowing it. Donald Trump last year took $350 billion out of the economy that could have gone into starting new businesses, could have allowed you to go on a vacation, to invest in an improvement in your house. Not going to happen this time. Again, record number of homes for sale versus demand. Why? Because no one's going to buy a house now. $350 billion pulled out of the economy last year, and now the energy problems, plus the spike in prices due to the already inflated monetary system, which Donald Trump really helped fuel in 2020 with the CARES Act. You can't have all that money being pumped into an economy at a certain very steep curve if productivity can't keep up or surpass it without prices skyrocketing, because the money bids up all the prices. So something's got to give. And so these people might not be rehired because expenses are higher in other areas. So they're using AI to try to cut their expenses, but they're not going to have the opportunity to save money. They're just trying to stay afloat. Because, of course, inflation, as we saw, is at 4.3% year over year for the last month of May. And yet, what did we see yesterday? We saw Scott Bessent with Maria Bartiromo talking about a certain type of constructions increasing 17 to 19% when those numbers weren't even released. I looked it up. There's nothing from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, nothing in that. And we mentioned it in the show. You can look at the show yesterday. I showed the information. Scott Bessent just lying to her face with a made-up statistic. And she didn't even question him. I mean, how much self-respect do you lack to actually be a journalist and say, hey, can you provide me with that data? That's scary. And as I said, this actually lends to the arguments of people like Dick Durbin. Dick Durbin, a left-winger from Illinois, actually sounds like he makes a lot of sense. Why? Because, of course, it's the dialectic. The Hegelian dialectic is in front of everybody. Whereas Donald Trump is depicted as the conservative, cutting taxes, doing all these things. And a guy like Dick Durbin will bring up, well, you're not helping the people who are desperate. There's a bigger differential between the rich and the poor. We must tax the rich more and give it to the poor. That's the only answer, according to Dick Durbin. Let me show you a little bit because I've got that prepared for you. Let me go over to Dick Durbin right now. This is Dick Durbin, and he is getting ready to go home after squeezing your wallet for plenty. And he does make some valid points, though. And this is the problem. Now, Dick Durbin sounds like a hero. He's talking about how Donald Trump doesn't care about the little guy. And we saw that, as I mentioned yesterday, women and infant children. That program is being cut by $2 billion from $82 billion last year to $80 billion this year. Whereas before that, the year before, it was it's going down. Yeah, it was 78 billion. Then it went up to 82 billion, and now it's going to go down to 80 billion. So it's a general increase over a couple years ago where it was at 78, but they pumped it up to 82. Now it's going to go back down to 80. So the Democrats, again, they have more ammunition to say, well, the Republicans and MAGA, they don't care about the little guy. These women need this money. They need this food. Okay, hard on your sleeve, I understand. But people who swear oaths to the Constitution, as David Crockett said, can't claim that your money is theirs. They can't claim that they're doing something kind for people at the end of a government gun pointed at you. Charity begins with volition. It doesn't come from the point of a gun. And this is the problem. This is their alternate in the dialectic. It's Trump and the Republicans cutting wick, and the problem of the economy and higher inflation numbers, and Donald Trump spending all this money on this war. Okay, good point about all that stuff. But their answer, increase government spending for social welfare programs.
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Thanks, Mr. President. I listened to my colleague from Wyoming, my friend, Senator Barrasso, talk about the benefits of the Trump policies when it comes to American families. I don't know the situation in his home state of Wyoming, but let me tell you the situation in most states of the union, including my home state. American families are struggling. They don't believe the Trump policies is giving them any relief from what they face on a day-to-day basis. I wonder when the last time was that members of the Senate filled up a tank of gasoline in their home states and realized the dramatic increase in cost is working a real hardship, particularly on working families in lower to middle income jobs. They're struggling to get by paycheck to paycheck, and now they've got gasoline bills that they never anticipated. There's no end in sight. And to talk about relief for American families and ignore the cost of gasoline is really to ignore the obvious. The same thing is true when it comes to utility bills. In my state, utility bills are up.
We'll get past that, no problem. I had to squeeze in these ads. You know how they always do it. So go right over here. Here we go.
Year over last year. There are a lot of reasons for it, and they've been explained over and over on the floor. But the bottom line, there is no Trump policy addressing this issue, particularly no policy that really is moving us toward renewable and sustainable sources of energy for generations to come. How about the price of groceries? The tariff policies of this administration have led to a protest by farmers across the United States. These tariff policies hurt their ability to compete on the world market. That's why the president recently went to the Midwest in the hopes of salvaging his reputation with farmers in rural communities. For the senator from Wyoming to come to the floor and talk about the benefits to American families is to ignore the increased cost of groceries that people put up with every day. What the senator didn't mention as well is that the big, beautiful Trump budget bill also made some dramatic changes when it came to the cost of health care for American citizens. The idea of cutting $1 trillion out of the Medicaid program over the next several years is not only going to create a hardship on people with illness, but it's also going to create a hardship on providers. Already in my state, where many rural hospitals and inner city hospitals struggle to keep their doors open, the notion of these cutbacks in Medicaid mean not only fewer treatments for those who are sick and need medical care, but it also means when it comes to these hospitals.
All right, so I want to pause it there because this is a perfect spot to pause it. So you can see the answer to these people is always central command and control. It's how they want to steer your economic decisions, your bottom line, and borrow from future generations to do what they think is important. It's all done from Washington, D.C. It's all done through central planning. This is what the United States has become. And it isn't that it just became this, of course, 250 years later. They started to do this with Alexander Hamilton. He wanted to have pork programs, or what they called internal improvements. That's why they usurped the Articles of Confederation and went with a central taxing powered constitution. That's why they marched on the whiskey makers in Western Pennsylvania. That's why Henry Clay was popular with a lot of bankers, and so was Abraham Lincoln. That's why the North attacked the South when the South wanted to secede, because it was everything's got to be centrally planned. Everything's got to be done with the central planning in mind for those cronies out there. And of course, they don't think that you should be able to decide for yourself. Tariff policy, tax policy, regulatory policy, green alternative energy, as Dick Durbin says. And don't forget, as I've mentioned before, Dick Durbin portrayed himself as a hero many years ago against Bank of America, because Bank of America was going to start charging the users of its bank cards a fee for their transactions. He said, "This isn't fair. This is not fair at all. Why are you suddenly doing this? This isn't right." What he didn't tell people was about 3 months before that, he, thanks to Walgreens being at that time one of his primary donors, at the behest of Walgreens, the drugstore, he recognized that Walgreens didn't like the fact that for their stores and most other stores on the consumer retail level, those stores would pay a fee to the credit card companies, their banks, for upload of data. If you work in the retail area, you know that in the old days, you used to upload the batch, they would call it, at the end of the day. You'd do it through the phone lines, and it would be all the credit card data in this little box. As you put the credit card through, it would collect all the data, and then at the end, you'd call it in through the phone lines. That was called upload the batch. Well, after a while, they got little satellite dishes. Those would go up on the top of buildings. And if you had things like strip malls, people at strip malls would share those things. Sometimes there'd be one or two, and they would be able to utilize and spend the amount of money that would go up, and it would go to Bank of America or whatever, and they would upload their batch. But the privilege of being able to take the credit card from customers was something for which retailers paid. They would pay a fee to say, okay, we're going to pay a fee. We're going to accept your credit cards and we'll pay this fee. Well, Walgreens didn't want to pay the fee. So they lobbied Washington and their favorite special politician, Dick Durbin from Illinois, Walgreens based in Illinois, and he proposed a bill and got it passed that would prohibit banks from charging retailers for the use of their cards, for bank cards, ATM cards, credit cards, anything like that, right? So obviously, that means that the banks are now missing a pretty sizable amount of money from the retailers who used to be paying them this money, but now they can't because the United States government prevents this from happening. They can't collect it from the retailers. So what did the banks do? They immediately, almost immediately, within weeks, started to charge their customers for using the cards. And then Dick Durbin comes out and says, I'm rescuing the customers from these evil banks and the charges that they're suddenly applying to their customers with the cards. Like, dude, they're doing it because of your bill. It was amazing. I literally was doing a radio show at the time, watching him on the floor in Washington, speaking about the evil banks when he himself was the cause of the bank's actions. It was stunning, absolutely amazing. But again, here you see he's got grist for the mill, and it's the Hegelian dialectic. What's the answer, right? Amazing, amazing. These politicians, it's just crazy. Hey, let's take an opportunity to check out what's going on for you all in the chats, and then we're going to hop over. Actually, before I even do that, I do want to mention a couple other quick things on the warfare front. I was going to switch out, but I can't. I got to make sure that I mention some of these things happening in Gaza and Lebanon. Very, very important things here. Let me talk to you about the West Bank. You might have seen this already. New footage has emerged in the killing of 7-month-old Palestinian Sam Abu Haikal in the occupied West Bank. So keep this in mind, everybody, okay? Video appears to show the family's car slowing to a stop before an Israeli soldier opens fire. As the father said, we had stopped. Now, regardless of whether they stopped or didn't stop, how about why are Israeli armed soldiers occupying the West Bank? Maybe you can stop there. And this is the result of it. This is good reporting from Al Jazeera or Sky News.
The shooting of a 7-month-old Palestinian baby by an Israeli soldier in the occupied West Bank shocked and appalled many. Now new footage has emerged, shedding more light on how little Sam Abu Haikal was killed. This is the video released by the human rights organization B'Tselem. You can see the family car slowing to a halt in South Hebron. There are 2 Israeli soldiers visible nearby who gesture at the car to stop, which it does. Next, we see Sam's father cradling his mortally wounded baby, trying to stop the bleeding after the car is apparently shot at. His wife, badly injured, collapses in the street. Sam was taken to hospital but died of his injuries. His father is traumatized.
كان كله حدث آخر شيء يحكوا لك إنه بالخطأ ما في شيء اسمه بالخطأ في شيء اسمه تهور شيء اسمه قتل عمد مبرر لا.
So he says this is premeditated murder, justified, no way.
طفل ما فيش بإيده.
It's a child who cannot do anything.
يعمل شيء.
He says the same bullet passed through his hand before striking his son and wife. She remains in hospital. The Israeli military says the soldiers fired because they perceived a vehicle accelerating towards them. Instead, this video shows the car slowing to a halt. Israel has admitted the victims were civilians and says it will open an investigation. But over the past decade, less than 1% of those investigations have ended in an indictment.
We know that in previous cases, and we're talking about dozens, all Israel is doing about this investigation is using it as a whitewash mechanism to postpone or to cancel any comments from international media or international community. As so far in Israel, there's total impunity for anyone who's arming Palestinian, whether it's a soldier or an Israeli citizen.
Since October the 7th, 2023, Israeli security forces and settlers have killed more than 1,000 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank.
It's just absolutely crazy. It's just crazy. Again, Donald Trump is doing so much for Israel, and yet every day we keep seeing more war crimes, absolute destruction, murder, rapes. What is going on? UN says violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank is rising sharply, with at least 44 Palestinians killed since the start of the year. A new UN report says settler attacks on Palestinian villages have risen by 130% since 2023. And that's just the West Bank. Here's Lebanon. The Israeli Defense Force continued to kill people during the so-called ceasefire and expanded its attacks on the northwestern coastal region of Tyre. Here's anti-war on it. Quote, exodus from Lebanon's Tyre as Israel orders locals out of Christian quarter. They just order them. You're in Lebanon? Oh, yeah, it's a different country. Yeah, we're going to order you out of the Christian quarter. Yeah, for the first time since they invaded Lebanon in March, the Israeli military issued an explicit evacuation warning for the Christian quarter of the ancient city of Tyre, claiming that there were Hezbollah secretly hiding amongst the Christians. What followed was an attempt by the remaining Christian population to flee northward, an effort that would have been a lot easier if Israel hadn't destroyed the bridge over the Litani River that is directly north of the city over a month ago. Maybe that was the one that they destroyed where Steve Sweeney was standing when they tried to assassinate Steve Sweeney from RT. The locals are trying to reach Sidon and in some cases Beirut. Meanwhile, attacks on Tyre continue to pace, killing at least 9 and wounding dozens of others. At least 15 strikes were reported against Tyre on Tuesday morning alone. Hi, Mike Huckabee, with no signs that the attacks were slowing and no signs that any of the people hit in the airstrikes were actually had anything to do with Hezbollah. Oh, what? No way. Christian religious leaders from Tyre were quick to call for international intervention to protect their historic neighborhood, saying that targeting of the Christian quarter would amount to a humanitarian catastrophe. Christian leaders further disputed the claim that Hezbollah was operating in the Christian neighborhood in the first place, saying it was a fabricated Israeli pretext to justify attacking that part of the city, which had previously been largely left alone. Not that Tyre in general hasn't been a constant target of the IDF. Jabal Amal Hospital, one of Tyre's largest, has been hit no less than 3 times so far this month. Well, you know how it is. It's sort of like mowing the lawn, right? You got to do it more than once. Most recently, over the weekend, the hospital has been significantly damaged by the attacks and a large number of healthcare workers wounded. Jason Ditz. Thank you, Jason, and Dave DeCamp for doing such great work over at Anti-War. Great stuff from those guys. And, of course, yes, don't forget the Israelis, what they did in Gaza. Israeli drones in South Lebanon are using the sound of crying children to lure out civilians, just like they did in Gaza. That's right. The Cradle's got the story. They're repeating their behavior of putting out sounds of crying children. Yep. Amazing. The acoustic warfare tactics. Well, maybe that's something Scott Bessent might want to get into, huh? He's really good with his different types of warfare, economic warfare. He calls it economic diplomacy. Okay, right on, Scott. Is that like, can I just walk up to somebody and rob them and call it economic diplomacy? Wow, how'd you like that? Did you enjoy engaging in that economic diplomacy? That was fun, wasn't it? That was great. Yeah, and can you call punching somebody in the face a massage? How about that? Would that work? I don't know. I'm just wondering. Yeah. So yeah, there you go. Dick Durbin, don't forget Dickie. Dick Durbin talking about the affordability crisis, as I mentioned, again, pushing more government socialism and welfarism in the Hegelian dialectic, while Trump boisterously and unobstreperously says that he loves the inflation. He loves the inflation. He loves it.